Notice that before I even start tracing over it, I've adjusted the contrast. I've turned it black and white, and I've added some lines where it was kind of faint. I've erased things that didn't matter. And you can do some of this with curves. Here we go. So play around with these sliders. You can see I can lighten up stuff on this side. And this is just for tracing over. If I grab the middle, I can get the midtones up a little bit. And then this back one over here does the shadows. So if I kind of graze them out or make them darker. So the idea is to get enough contrast so you can see what you're tracing. So having some shading cues is really nice. Alright, so I took that image that I've adjusted all the contrast, and then usually in Procreate I turn the opacity down. This would be similar to throwing a piece of tracing paper over if you're just doing this by hand. And then the first step is to trace all the lines. And so you can see I've, let's turn off now the layer behind because that is no longer needed. So notice that the character is much more loose, kind of broken up lines, very sketchy. And then the object itself has got more detail in it. And then also make sure that your ellipses are correct. I actually did a test here. I did this before we had the ellipse tool, but if you're using Procreate, draw a center line, make sure that it's equal distant from those corners and these. And you should be down the center. And then if you carefully trace over, let's go back for a minute and turn this one off. Go back to our original model. And so if I trace over, going kind of slowly, methodically, it's okay if I get a little bumpy in here, but, oops, like right there. And if I hold it, you'll see it kind of pops, and then I can say edit shape. And the key is I want to get these little blue dots on that line, because that is the minor axis. And then I can adjust these a little bit, and that looks close enough, I think. And this even works over here, so like this has actually got two ellipses, and I should have, if I were making this model again, you notice we drew the lines or Sharpie lines to help us find the edges. This kind of has a tapering detail here, but I don't have to make the full complete ellipse. I can stop short of it, and then same deal, edit. And this takes just a little bit of back and forth because, like I said, when you move one, the other ones kind of shift around. And then there's a secondary one. Well, this one's a little trickier because I gotta kind of stay parallel, and it's going to go behind the edge of the lens about in there. So I'm gonna stop short. I could erase a little bit if I wanted to, but that one looks pretty good. And notice this one doesn't say ellipse, it says arc. So that's fine. And then, you know, I'd go in and draw these details and let those snap. So if you're doing this in by hand in markers, one of the important things, I'm going to turn off all this because I already did the lines, is to use a different line weight. So the object has the outside of the object has the heaviest line weight, and notice that this right here is an outside edge, and it goes along, and then right here is where this should continue. But if you just do this edge and then go transition over to here, that technically that's all outside, but it looks a little abrupt. So what I usually do is continue that line inward, and then see I kind of faded it out because that lens is really a separate object on top of the background, which is the basic camera body. I like to try to keep 3 different line weights. So a lot of times when I'm drawing ink drawings, I'll have 3 different weight black outline pens to do the heavier outlines, the thinner details, and then super thin stuff. Okay, so we got the line drawing, and then I'm going to actually throw the color in here just because it's easier to see. So I just masked this out and threw some flat color in here. And this makes it really easy to kind of change the colors and stuff. You don't want to try to paint the color in with shading. So the color is just totally flat, and then you add a separate layer that's the shadows. So I'm turning it on off. And then another separate layer that's the highlights. And you can control all these separately. And the nice thing here is if I go back to the color and hue, saturation, brightness, I can choose the color, and all the shading and everything updates so I don't have to go back in and try to figure that out every time. I added a lens, and this is also a little tricky. You have to find a camera that's kind of in the almost in the exact same position because you want those ellipses to be correct. This looks like not quite right to me. It's the ellipses aren't quite matching, but that's as close as I got here. What I was going to do is in the shadow layer, now I'm going to make a quick selection and add a little texture. Now if you're doing this by hand, you can take like a black Prismacolor and rub it over a texture. Even cloth will give you a nice texture. So I'm going to pick, actually I'm not going to pick the color, I want to pick black because I want this to act like the shadow layer. And I'm going to pick this texture, and I'm going to turn the opacity way down. And then I'm going to brush in a little detail. And some of these textures can really add some life to your drawings. And now we'll get out of here. So I'm going to call this down. I got to turn off the background layer again. And now you can really see how that camera, once it's in color and everything, it really pops, and then the background just gives you size, scale.